Hello and welcome to another episode of the After School Club with myself, Max Pemberton. Today we are joined by Craig Pinkney. Now, Craig has over 20 years experience as an outreach worker, transformational speaker, international gang exit strategist, training facilitator, mediator, mentor, and filmmaker, plus much more. Take a listen to the impact that Craig's had on the lives of young people, not only nationally but also internationally. His story is fascinating, so take it all in and enjoy the episode. Craig, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome, man. It's an honor, as always.
Appreciate it. I know you're a busy man. I see you here, there, and everywhere on social media, so really do appreciate your time. I want to start with a quote, actually, that's on your website. I'm all about bridging the gap between academia and the streets. Can you just tell us more about that?
I think it's kind of my my vision, which is attached to my motto. I'm all about bridging that gap, creating a standard. And in order for me to bring that standard in, when I'm talking about people that are working directly with children, young people, vulnerable communities, at-risk families, for me, it's about where does that academic rigor and understanding that comes in partnership with your lived experience and bringing that together, that will enable you to be able to help people and see the kind of gaps in terms of where services have failed in being able to respond to those particular issues. So when I talk about bridging that gap, it's bringing that academic rigor with that kind of real life lived experience and connecting that to the streets and bringing that one. And that's kind of my unique selling point.
Okay, great. And in terms of working with young people and vulnerable people, do you think that the people that have got the lived experience and people that have also studied it and built their knowledge, that's surely the best combination to be working and helping young people?
Most definitely. I think one of the things that is important is about how do we apply the theory. And I think you can sit in a university or you can sit in a college and you can sit in a library and learn all of the books and all of the theories and all of the approaches, but how do you apply it? And equally, if you're a person that just works based on passion, you're going to need to know the models and the theories that will enable people to understand, because you might be doing an intervention that has demonstrated that it doesn't work. So it's not just based on your passions and what you think about your lived personal experiences that you'll be able to contribute. It's about intersecting that and bringing that together. And that's why I go back to my motto about bridging that gap between academia and the streets and finding that center, that balance that will enable an individual that works with any type of environment to be able to mitigate and work and deal with those issues.
Yeah, and obviously you've done a lot of studying yourself. You're continuing to study a PhD, am I right?
I'm on my final lap of the PhD. It's been intense. It's been a real test in terms of who I am. It's really kind of put me in a kind of self-exploration way of, how do I view these particular issues? But it's also helped with my kind of analytical way of dealing with these particular issues and being able to, as I've just said, see where the gaps are and being able to support individuals to fulfill that, but also from a personal level, to show that, I came out of school with no GCSEs. I struggled in education for a long period of time. I discovered I had dyslexia quite late. And being able to, reach to the kind of highest of education that has to offer, being able to take those particular tools and bring that back into a space where I'm able to support, provide, and enable individuals to be able to respond to some of the issues in our society that we're worried about. That's what it's all about for me.
Yeah, dyslexic to PhD sounds pretty impressive. Sounds good. And actually, you've just touched upon it there, your experience at school. And actually, I want to rewind all the way back to when you were at school. And really, what I'm interested in is how have you got to do what you do now every single day? Because it's quite a unique field, really, that you're in, and you're diving in real depth into a lot of topics that a lot of people actually have never even, stepped foot into that area. Tell us about school. How was school? Where did you go to school? And what was that whole experience like for you?
So I went to school in inner city Birmingham, primary school, St. Francis, for those that know about Hockley BAT. That was the beginning. I think primary school was one of my most amazing experiences. I still remember my primary teachers, Mrs. Brumont, Mrs. Gaynor. I remember those individuals and those individuals that taught me, I think, some of the foundations along with my family, commitment, compassion, love, self-care.
We speak about this actually in every episode about going back to school, and was there someone that really made an impact on you, a positive impact that you still remember to this
Yeah,
day?
man.
And actually, the majority of
Yeah,
people we
yeah,
speak to, it's and they name the teacher, just like you've just done. What is it specifically you remember? Any moment about any of those teachers that really comes back to
I
you?
mean, I always start with the question, just reflecting on a quote, and sometimes you may forget what people say to you, but you'll never forget how they made you
Made you
feel.
feel, yeah.
So when you ask that question, what was it about Miss Brumont and Miss Gaynor that stuck with me? And if I remember an activity, it would have been reading and
Yeah,
bakery.
yeah,
Like it wasn't anything of significance, but it was their approach to working with people,
yeah.
and their approach to me, my peers,
Mm,
and that's what that sticks out for me. It was just that loving. When you're in primary school, everyone seems really old,
yeah,
and they were probably young themselves, but that compassion, that love, that want and need to push you to the highest level, them also acknowledging that we were children of color, and
mm,
also being very few black teachers in the school, representation matters. So it felt like just my nan and my auntie,
yeah,
being in an environment. And it's funny because they'll probably watch this and think, Craig, I wasn't old when I was that, but when you're little children,
yeah,
everybody seems really, really
yeah.
old.
I remember always
Um,
thinking, oh, university, people are so old. And then I've finished university, I'm thinking, oh no, I'm one of them.
You're one of them
Yeah,
now.
I'm getting old.
And so those are the things that for me, compassion, love,
Mm,
and the commitment and the willingness to support, and stick with us throughout that journey. So I love primary school. I think secondary school was a completely different experience.
mm,
That love, that compassion, I didn't really feel it.
mm.
And I think because I'm that type of person that's quite sensitive, I switched off quite early from education, in secondary school, because I don't know if I was just kind of looking for that same type of connection that
Yeah,
I've learnt for or embraced for so many years in the primary space. Um, and I do remember at secondary school there was a teacher named Mr. Barrett, and he was our maths teacher, and I always found maths quite difficult. But if you used to ask the same question again, what made him stand out
mm,
was the same things:
mm,
compassion, commitment, and going above and beyond. So that
yeah,
was probably slightly different to what I acknowledged when I was probably like 14,
yeah.
15. Um,
And the way they deliver the lessons, because you could be teaching the same thing, right? But one teacher delivers it in a
I
totally
didn't
different
really,
way.
I would be honest and say I didn't really acknowledge that till probably later.
Mm,
I'm going to go back to those intricate, nuanced interactions, the above and beyond. And what I mean by that is after the session, break time, lunchtime, he'd sit with us at the table
mm,
and he'd share some of his cake.
yeah,
And those little things always stick with me.
yeah.
So it wasn't about what happened in the classroom, it was actually what happened outside of the classroom, which
Mm,
is really important. And especially in the educational space, you can do sometimes there's amazing things as an educator, but sometimes it's about that extra little bit. And especially if you're working in environments where there's children and young people that are coming from all different types of backgrounds, and their experiences may be
mm,
fundamentally different. And especially if communities are dealing with trauma, poverty,
mm,
mental health, lack of, resources to be able to deal with some of the issues that may be affecting the community. The children sometimes come to school with those particular issues, and I lived in those types of
mm,
environments. So coming to school and having a teacher that showed that they care, that's what stuck for me. So I don't remember,
yeah,
I never liked maths. I don't think Mr. Brown made maths any better,
yeah,
but I like being in his presence, which is interesting because when I think about going to the point where I started to do my GCSEs, the only sessions that I took care or paid attention in was the ones where the teachers I thought I had the relationship,
yeah,
which is a weird way of thinking as a child,
mm,
because I used to tell myself I'm going to do really well for Mr. Barrett. I'm going to do really well
yeah,
for that teacher,
yeah.
because those are the teachers that showed me those same
I guess
those skills.
similar in in a sport context when you play for the manager, and it's a similar sort of thing. You've got the ability, but for one manager, you'd run through a brick
Yeah,
wall for him.
yeah, yeah,
But I guess it's a similar sort of thing,
yeah.
and some teachers and a lot of the teachers we work with and that I speak to every single week, they've just got an aura
Mm,
about them, and I don't
mm,
know how to describe it. And
mm.
and sometimes when I'm speaking to schools, I just say, I just know they're going to be a good fit,
Yeah,
and they say, but how?
yeah,
And I don't know what it is,
yeah.
but you just
Mm.
know. How can you transfer those skills and give advice to people to to can you develop an aura like that to transfer into the classroom and to help young people?
And I think it solidifies my point about when I talk about bridging that gap between academia and the streets, and your counter question was about that lived experience. And I think that lived experience is linked to that aura that you was talking about, that I believe some people have that natural disposition to want to help, that natural disposition to, want to support or do something around that. But that needs to be harnessed and garnered with the skills and the attributes to enable individuals to, 10x that. And I think that's what becomes really important. So that gift that you're acknowledging is almost like raw talent.
Yeah.
But how can you ensure that raw talent, is reshaped in a particular way that whatever institution that they go into is able to kind of meet the needs of not just the institution, but the individuals that are there.
Yeah, because I've met people along the way, and as soon as I've started speaking to them, I'm like, you would be fantastic in a school, and I know exactly which school I want to place you in, because I know that they're just going to bring success to that school. But along the way, we need to put them through training, develop them along the way. So after secondary school, what happened then? What was your journey then? Obviously,
so secondary school, towards the end, as I said, I practically switched off. But I had a mentor, or a series of mentors. One of my favorite mentors at the time, Kim. She passed away a few years ago. So big up her children whilst they're watching this. Your mum had an amazing impact on my life. But I had another mentor named Trevor, and he'd always be like, you know what, you got so much energy, you need to do something with it. So he used to play basketball. So during the moments where I probably wasn't behaving, and he'd take me out of class, basketball was one of those things that he used to kind of get me engaged in. And as I was leaving, I guess year 11, he had said to me that he had another friend in the community named Herman Wilson, that is like the coach for the national team in Birmingham at the time. And he said that, you should try out. So I went to the few tryouts, and I got into the team. So anybody remembers Birmingham Bullets and Birmingham Excel, you may remember those days. And, I was one of the, the under 18 players at that time. And I would say that was quite significant for me, because I felt like the basketball came at a really interesting time where I guess a lot of my friends, members from the community, didn't have that kind of extra curricular activity to do. So everyone was just kind of chilling and hanging out in the area, in the local community. And as you know, at that time, there wasn't really a major investment in the community for loads of kind of activities for young people to do. So whereas some of my friends, not all, ended up, hanging around with the wrong crowds. Some of them ended up in groups. I don't like to use the word gang in that context, but I want to use the word groups, that ended up getting involved in a number of things. Basketball was my kind of go-to. So on the weekends, that's what I was doing. I was playing basketball. So that I would say is probably my early interaction in terms of youth work, because Herman, at the side of that, had a organization called TBA, the Basketball Alliance.
Right.
So they were running kind of like programs for children and young people, during the summer programs, Easter, Christmas, all of those kind of national breaks and holidays. And we were coaching for young people on behalf of him.
Okay.
And going back to education in my GCSEs, I got a good grade in performing arts. So when I went to college, everybody may remember this, that you had to do, it was like a national diploma. You remember national diplomas?
Yeah, I did one.
So I had to do a BTEC first.
Yeah.
So if you don't remember the BTEC first, these were like the people that, how could you not get onto a national diploma? So I had to do a BTEC first in order to get onto that. So whilst I was at college, I was at Sutton Coldfield College doing performing arts. Didn't really enjoy it, but made some amazing friends that I still have now, that are into acting and they're on TV doing their thing. And basketball coaching at that time became the thing that I guess was paying my little phone bill that I had at the time.
Yeah.
And then, whilst I was at college, I guess I developed some more of my skills. And this was at a time when a lot of my friends were wanting to go to America, going to Europe to play basketball. And I guess naturally you want the same ambition as your boys, right? Everyone
Yeah.
wants to go to the States. It's the big dream because basketball's not big in this country, but it is in Europe and it is in
Yeah.
America. So I never forget the English Cup final, Birmingham versus East Durham. Ball goes up, someone took a 3-point shot. I run to get the ball. A guy knocks me over. And I ruptured my ACL in my right knee.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, that was
I
one of
know
the
the
worst things that could have happened.
feeling.
And quite a long story short, they essentially took me out of the sport.
Mm.
And that for me was probably one of the most, when we talk about mental health, if I was to identify what I was going through at that time, was probably a serious level of depression. Because again, I'm witnessing my friends,
And at the
getting
time,
ready to
that's all
fly
you
out the
wanted to
country.
do.
There was nothing else. And it's funny because my dad used to always say, have a plan B.
Yeah.
Pay attention. There's a reason why I keep saying pay attention at school. When I'm back in bed, I'm just like, what? This basketball thing's it's gonna take
This
me
is what I'm
somewhere.
doing. Yeah.
And then education will be secondary. But my dad was like, no, make education primary.
Mm.
So I was always getting the messages from home, from family. I guess as a young teen, you think you know it all sometimes, and you know more than your parents and your family members, and that's what became it. So during that period of what I would call depression, my dad told me to link up with one of his friends that was also kind of like a family friend as well. His name was Wesai Booth. And Wesai was like this short Rasta man that worked for the youth service.
Right.
And you may remember the days of connections. And there was like an information shop that used to be located in the old library of Birmingham. And there was a youth service like office. So it was him, another worker named Yasmin from Leicester, and another member of staff named Christine. And I used to visit that place quite frequently. And I guess I probably was there moping around. And they were reinforcing that, Craig, you've got something about you. So you see when you talk about that energy.
Yeah.
But I wasn't acknowledging it for self.
Yeah.
So people telling me is one thing, but me acknowledging it was two different things.
But surely, you must have known to a certain extent to have the confidence to go and do performing arts and to start coaching as well. That's not for everyone. Some people really shrink in those environments, and actually, when I've done coaching in the past, it's something that I naturally have enjoyed, but other people in the group hated it.
I think maybe because of my role in sport at the time, it became like a natural disposition. When you're on defense, you got to shout. You got to be loud. You got to be a presence.
Yeah.
And I guess I carried those skills into the things that I was doing with children. But I think I didn't acknowledge it as a profession. I didn't acknowledge it as something that could become
You could really use
career. So it was only through those interactions when they were saying to me, you'd be a brilliant mentor. You spoke about having a mentor. We are youth workers. You'd be brilliant at the stuff that we do. And I'll be honest, at that time, it really wasn't anything that I was interested in. And I remember one of them saying to me, this is how much a youth worker gets paid a year. And that got my attention.
Yeah.
So when I kind of started looking into it now, so I said, so what have I got to do to basically become one of these youth workers? Yeah. And they were saying, well, you got some of the skills already. But there was a course that they referred me to go on. And I remember the first course being in an area which was not far from my primary school. But I guess when you grow up in an area and environment and you're told don't go to that particular area, it becomes quite conflicting. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But despite the fact that you ain't got no conflict or problems with somebody, those narratives of someone saying don't go over there, it becomes like a boogeyman that lives over there, like a monster's over there, and you don't do that. So I had a lot of anxiety going to a training course to learn about youth work because it was in an area that was considered by my elders as an area that's known as the block. But anyway, I somehow convinced them to get me there in taxis and whatnot because of that safety. But when I got there and I arrived, all of the people that there were fine. There was no issues. And that's when I kind of started to learn and understand that a lot of these assumptions are assumptions that are in my mind. And then if I had those assumptions at that age, being at college, what about all of the younger ones in the community that are told by individuals, don't go there and you have to only stay in these little pockets? It then becomes a mindset that becomes fixed and static. And then people struggle to then evolve from that. So I would say that those are the early learnings that I got that will enable me then to become the individual that I was. So from doing that course, I went on to another course and another course. You may remember the days of record of achievements. That big
Yeah,
purple
yeah,
book.
yeah,
So
yeah. Still got one, I
I
think.
was just filling up my little thing because I knew I didn't have GCSEs to
So
prove
you
it.
need
But
it.
I got so if I got into a meeting or I had an interview, I could say,
Yeah.
listen, I don't have qualifications,
Yeah.
but I've got
This
experience
is what
and
I've
I've
got.
got passion and I've got drive.
Mm.
And they helped me, Christine, whereas Yasmin, they helped me develop my application form, and they said that I should go to university out of the city, which became De Montfort University.
Yeah.
So I went into De Montfort University, fresh from the block. I didn't have a clue what these lecturers were talking about. And I remember meeting an individual, and I talk about it all the time, Carlton Housen, now Dr. Carlton Housen. And I remember him talking, and I remember him looking at me, but there was a lot of things going on in my head. I think one was the assumption that I didn't know black people outside of school was at that level of education. So that was one thing that was going on in my mind.
Yeah.
Two, this was a very weird environment for me. Three, am I stupid because I don't understand what he's saying?
Yeah.
And all he was doing was talking English, but the words and the vocabulary that he was using had a lot of things going on in my mind at that time. And I remember him saying, Craig, do you understand what I'm saying? And I quite confidently said, no, I don't, but I'll get it at some point.
Yeah.
And I've always been that type of person. I've always been up for a challenge.
Yeah.
And it was through those interactions that I decided to develop a relationship with Colton. You know, I'd sit with him on my lunch break, you know, really trying to make sense of these concepts that he was using, these words, socialization, and these are words that it's funny because I talk about them now in my work, but at the time,
you didn't know.
These are new themes and new concepts.
What were you studying? Criminology?
So my degree was in youth and community studies.
Okay.
That's what enabled me to become a youth worker. So I remember doing that course for about 3 years. And it was going into my third year where I didn't discover that I had dyslexia. There was these learning and development team from support services that came around to different classes. They were talking about dyslexia, dyspraxia, and all of these different learning needs. And they said they were doing free tests. So it was like, cool. I heard them say they were giving out free laptops.
Yeah.
So we were all looking like, yo, this might be something. But when I actually did the test, they then referred me to do another more extended one. And then it kind of discovered, and it made so much sense. And that was the
Everything
point
clicked.
where I felt like I became a student at that point.
Okay.
Because it made sense why I was always scraping the 40%. Because what I was doing, you remember when I said that in the beginning, I was kind of going through that experience of, am I stupid? Am I stupid? I was copying what everybody else was doing.
Yeah.
So my colleagues, my peers, they were getting post-it notes. They were getting like highlighters, pens. So I thought that was the thing to do. So I'm doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
But every time I'm going back to my dorm, I don't even know what I'm writing. And I'm thinking again,
it's not working for
am
you.
I stupid?
Yeah.
So when they introduced the concept of learning styles and discovering what your way of learning is, I was like, that's it.
Yeah.
That's why I sit with Carlton so long in the break times, because him giving me 3 of his books don't make no sense. But when I say, what does this mean, marginalization, and you break it down to me, it stays in my mind a whole lot longer than me you telling me to read a chapter on marginalization when I can just ask you, what do you mean in your book when you're talking about marginalization? It sticks a lot more. So when I then finished university, I then started to work for the youth service. I went back to Birmingham and I started to work in my own area, my own community, at a youth centre that was well known. And that's where it began. Yeah. And I would say that was my rites of passage. Where I was working with young people from the community that would have been considered vulnerable. Young people that we use words like CCE and CSE. So it would have been all those young people that would have had a number of kind of vulnerabilities, also educational specific needs, young people that were experiencing trauma, young people that were coming down from households, domestic violence, so loads of adverse childhood experiences. But the reason why I'm saying it in this way, because a lot of these concepts wasn't concepts that I learned whilst I was at university. And it was only really until a number of young people that I used to work with sadly lost their life to violence. And I had a real passion for wanting to know and learn more And that's what then kickstart my journey of wanting to do a master's degree in
Right.
criminology.
Right.
So I didn't do the undergrad in criminology. I done a master's in criminology. So I specialised in working with young people. But criminology was the area where it was going to become my niche.
Yeah.
And my focus essentially was, whilst I was there for the year, was what is it about children and young people, and how is it that they involve themselves or get caught up in issues to do with violence or criminality.
Yeah.
And that became me,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
So when I did my master's degree, I always told myself that my career is always going to be based on what I did for my master's. So my master's dissertation was the transitional stages for desisting children and young people for violence.
Okay.
So when you think about all of the work that I do now around prevention,
it's all related.
It's all related to what I was discovering whilst
Yeah.
I was at university. And I think that having that kind of foundation of youth and community work and understanding relationships, how to build relationships, you know, what it is to be, you know, emotionally intelligent and all of those different things.
Yeah.
Criminology didn't give me that skill set. The youth work did.
Yeah.
So intersecting that
The mix.
became what it is that I essentially do.
Yeah.
And then I guess, you know, the natural step for me at that time was to go into the academic space. So how I got into the academic space was an opportunity that came up from my previous line manager, Dr. Sangeeta Soni, big her up. And there was a program known as the EU Gangs Project, where it was a partnership between a number of countries: France, Ireland, Romania, Cyprus, Italy, Greece, and essentially came together as a consortium to talk about what does youth violence look like in a range of different contexts, and how do we respond. So the partnership was with a local university, UCB, and I was asked to be part of this kind of journey with them.
Right.
And from that opportunity to be part of the journey, I got an opportunity to lecture at the university. And it started around equality and diversity. And then I ended up on in the kind of children, young people and families department.
Yeah. I love the fact that when you first gone to university as a student, it was all new to you and a little bit alien to you. And then fast forward, you're the lecturer. You're the lecturer at the university. Yeah.
So yeah, when I was at university, I taught a number of modules on the youth and community related type of courses. So I taught criminology, criminal justice, offender management, responding to gangs and serious youth violence, you know, health and social care, professional practice.
Yeah.
And I guess a lot of those topics and modules that I was choosing or delivering on became, you know, what people see me doing around the nation.
Yeah.
And I think one of the good things about that time is that I was always someone that was quite in tune with social media and was coming out of the youth work context, because one of the things I used to kind of document was kind of my early experiences working with these young men. And when I started to upload these things online, what I noticed that people was giving me quite a lot of national and international attention. So that's where I got the request for TED Talk. That's where I got the request to go to, you know, America, to go to Jamaica, to go to different parts of Europe and talk about some of the ideas and the concepts and my experiences with young men. And I think 2015-16 was an interesting time, because you may remember at that particular point, Birmingham, the West Midlands, was dubbed as the gun crime capital of the country. And I guess my curiosity at that time was, what do I think is happening in this particular space? And one of the things that I acknowledged was social media was contributing to issues that was taking place in the community. And there was one incident that took place in my local community at the time, where a music video was released by a group of young boys that I used to work with. And subsequently that video gained quite a lot of traction, and it caused quite a lot of tension within the community. Fast forward, a number of those young people got incarcerated, and it's the first time we've seen drill music videos in the West Midlands, you know, be utilised in court for criminal convictions. And my curiosity was very much around, what is it about social media and technology that's causing and creating these particular behaviours? And that's what started my PhD.
Right, okay.
So my PhD was out of my curiosity about the young people that I was engaging with. So my PhD focused on the groups of young people that I used to work with from 2009 up until this particular point.
Right, okay. So it all came together, all your experiences came together, and you're still studying that now in your PhD. And it's interesting the part you say about music as well, because I've had a conversation with just friends actually about how important it is the music that you listen to.
Yes.
And I'm a big fan of R&B, hip hop, all of that. But I did get to a point where I still listen to all that music, by the
Yeah.
way. I got to a point where I thought, am I listening to this too much of the things they're speaking about? And actually, I went to university in America a little bit and had a lot of country music out there.
Yeah.
And now I've got right back into my country music.
Yeah.
And I've got a routine where every Sunday I listen to country music because the words they're speaking about, it sets me up for the week.
Yeah.
And it just puts my mind in the right space. How important do you think it is, not only just music, but everything that we're listening to day in, day out, especially young people? How important is that?
Most important, I think, when you just look at it from the perspective of, I would say, imagery and sound can shape your reality. So if you're watching something or you're engaging in something that's of a, let's say, a sexual nature,
Yeah.
it's going to have messages that's going to be around the sexual nature. I'm not saying you're going to go out and start being involved in kind of sexual activities, but it stimulates thought around those particular things. Equally, if you play games and games that happen to be violent and you're constantly playing particular games that are violent, it's going to have an impact.
Yeah.
You know, I like to watch UFC. I like to watch boxing.
Yeah.
So the excitement that I have when I'm with my boys watching a fight in the UFC or a championship boxing fight, I get amped. I like that at work, but that's what it does. So we have to understand, and I think, you know, without insulting people's intelligence, there is an argument here that if you're listening to sounds and you're listening to particular messages that may be deviant, that may be one that causes people to talk about particular behaviors or activities, it is going to stimulate some thought. The question is, who are the recipients of the messages? So for someone like us, as I said, I can watch UFC,
I can control it,
and I can control it. I know there's a difference between entertainment and my reality, but what about if it's a child or a young person in a community? And let's talk about all of the issues that I've just mentioned. You know, we're talking about trauma, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about specific needs. You might have children that have autism, you might have children that, you know, have ADHD, and the list goes on. When they watch and when they hear particular messages, how do you think it's going to adversely impact the way in which they think or they particularly behave? So I think it's insensitive for us to kind of look at this and think, well, I can't. I can't because of where I'm at in life. But I would assume if I was in an environment where that's all I'm getting and I'm not getting any other messages or imagery that's counter to what I'm watching or hearing, that might have an impact in the way in which I think.
And that's been amplified over the years. So, you know, when I was growing up, wasn't really about all the technology 24/7. But now,
Rangers,
it's,
that was probably the most of. If you want to talk about violence, that was probably the closest that we had to
wrestling,
violent behavior, wrestling. And as I said, Power Rangers when we were growing up. And then, you know, the levels start to change. You may remember Rambo, you know, Sylvester Stallone. And,
great film.
You know, but when you actually start thinking about now, when you just turn on Netflix, you got Narcos, you got access to all of these different things. So what we see is a reflection of the wider society. So when you ask the question about music, the question is, what are they talking about? And oftentimes they're talking about their realities, the realities of which they see and they experience every single day. The problem that we have around these particular messages is what the messages are kind of dictating or suggesting that it's very hostile environments, which they probably are. But what do you do in those hostile environments? And those individuals are passing messages of what they do in hostile environments to survive, to be safe, to ensure that their friends and their family members are protected. And these particular messages by default subliminally become part of what we call the code of the streets. So there are things that you do. So if me and you are in a conflict, rather than me call the police, I'm going to call one of my boys, but this is what the code dictates. And if anything was to go wrong and I need help or support, you don't tell the authorities. We deal it with ourselves. Now, one can play that position and say, you know what, that makes perfect sense. Of course we can. But then when we use words like justice, when we use words like peace, when we use words like community healing, where does that sit within the conversation? Because there is no justice if people continuously are going back and forward in terms of conflict. So when you look at, you know, the wider things that are taking place in the world, we don't see no justice, because what we're oftentimes seeing is people just retaliating based on very minute things that oftentimes can be resolved in a range of different ways. So when you look at that under the microscope, in terms of what the things that we see in terms of the behaviors amongst our children, young people, and the wider community, we're seeing these messages play out in a range of different ways. And I guess our work as educators is to say, wait there, hold on. There is a separate option. There is another option. And I can show
and
you,
controlling
but
that.
you've got to allow me to give you the opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that is important when we talk about education, one of the things I talk about in my work is that representation matters. So we have to show that representation. We can't assume. So just like when I went to university and seen Dr. Carlton Housewood, I argue that educators like that need to come more into the community and be visible more.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I remember doing quite recently is that we invited a number of young people from the community, into the university, which is actually not far from where they live. And that's also quite interesting as well when we talk about environments and talking about counter narratives about ambition and where people want to go. And one of the things that I made it very clear about what I wanted to do was all of the professors and doctors that were going to introduce themselves to the young people were the doctors and professors that I like, that represent me.
Yeah.
So they wear trainers.
Yeah.
They wear Jordans too.
Yeah.
They wear tracksuits.
They look like us, is what they're thinking. Yeah.
But they're just articulate. And some of them are articulate, taught and use the same language that we use. And you could see the expression on the young people's faces, even with some of the, the female lecturers, and they had their nails and their earrings. And you could see the young people looking like, no way.
Yeah.
You're what? A doctor in social science, you're a doctor in this, and you're a professor in that. And it's showing those young people that, yes, you can attain the highest level of education and not have to compromise who you are or what you are. Yeah. And I think sometimes in these environments, when we're talking about identities, that people think that they have to appease groups and individuals and come out of who they are and what they are in order to fit and meet the needs of individuals. We talk about that around the word code switching. And the question is, do we have to? And I think that these things are what we don't talk about enough with young people. So if they're only getting one identity that is hyper-masculine, that's hyper-vigilant, that's always chaotic, that's nihilistic, and it's narcissistic, and those are the constant messages that are coming out in games and in films and in music, what do we expect if there's not enough counter narratives to challenge those particular ideals? And that's where our work comes in, is around how do we challenge those ideals, those thought processes of children and young people.
Great. So on a day-to-day basis, the company that you've set up is called Solve. So you're obviously solving or trying to work towards solving all these issues that we're speaking about. I love the name for a start. It's just straight to the point. It is what it is. On a day-to-day basis, a week-to-week basis, how are you working towards solving these particular issues? Are you going into schools and speaking directly to the young people, or are you training people to go in and send that message, or a bit of both? Just tell us about what you're doing.
First of all, is explain what Solve is.
Yes, please.
So Solve is a group of companies. So Solve is the main umbrella, and then we've got Solve, the Centre for Youth Violence and Conflict, of which is our organisation where we do training, workshops, consultancy for organisations, education, sports, schools, criminal justice. We got 3 levels of the work that we do. One is around professional development, helping individuals to understand how to engage with children, young people and families. The second level of the work that we do through the Centre for Youth Violence and Conflict is around how do we mobilise communities and get them involved, parents, key stakeholders, to some of the issues and where the challenges are. And the third level of the work that we do under the Solve Centre for Youth Violence and Conflict is around engaging children and young people directly, so raising awareness, building resilience, and also offering therapeutic intervention.
Right.
And then we've got Solve Housing, which is our children's homes. So we've got 2 children's homes that are located in the West Midlands. And in those children's homes, we've got an amazing staff team that give and provide 24-hour care for our children and young people. And then we've also got Solve Global, which is the consultancy company. And that's the stuff that you probably see me doing with football and working with the Premier League, in partnership with the Premier League, and supporting them with their endeavours around education, with the players around a number of issues. So it's a conglomerate of different organisations. So when people see it, they're probably like, well, what exactly are you doing? So I'm the overseer of what's taking place. But in terms of my day-to-day, more so probably the Centre for Youth Violence and Conflict is what you see me doing, whether I'm delivering training for local authority. And I've got an amazing staff team that deliver workshops for those young people. So we have people with lived experience that have been trained by us. And they go out and deliver sessions or peer mentoring in schools, pupil referral units, colleges, wherever the need is at.
Yeah, and do you think there's there's a common theme when working with young people with what the issues are, or is it just a wide range of a lot of the things that you've already
It
spoken
depends
about?
what the issues are. I think regionally, and sometimes the inner city may have some kind of
Mm.
overlaps in terms of the issues. But I want to just bring us back to some recent research coming out of COVID-19. We know that mental health is on the increase and has been since COVID-19. We know that young people's vulnerabilities have been impacted by the economic sphere and the political sphere of this country. We've seen more cuts been announced even in the last 3 months
Yep.
in a number of local authorities up and down the country. So then that would mean then young people are going to have less access to buildings, workers, staff teams that are able to mitigate some of the issues that they're dealing with.
Yep.
So their vulnerabilities then by default are going to be on the increase. We see more and more young people dealing with their mental health through social highs, more drinking, more smoking, more taking pills, chemicals. We're seeing more young people self-harming, more young people taking their lives or having at least suicide ideation. So we see a number of kind of things that are happening. And I think when I always mention this, we have to talk about the political sphere and the impact of the political sphere and how that impacts the economy and how that then causes that ripple effect on what we see in the local community. So it's very easy to say, oh my God, all of these kids are involved in knife crime and all of these kids are involved in drug dealing and they're exploiting each other. But we have to take a step back and whilst we engage in these issues, where has all of this come from? And if you think over the last 10 years, when we've seen nothing but cuts in terms of services, the police, mental health services, and so on and so forth, it's kind of like a no-brainer. There's no surprise to know why these issues are taking place in our society. So our organizations are basically trying to find better ways of not just engaging directly with young people, because our message is a 360 approach. So we don't work just directly with young people, and that's the reason why Solve is set up in a particular type of way.
Right.
And I said it's 3 levels.
Yeah.
Because there is no point, and our research demonstrates there is no point doing an amazing assembly for 45 minutes, you disappear with the expectation that Ofsted and the Department for Education are thinking that 45-minute that's mandatory in schools is going to solve the problem. No, we want to also work with the staff that are going to reinforce our messages when we take that into school. And number 3, we want access and be able to engage with parents. So our messages exist beyond the school premises and they also can operate at home, but also giving that opportunity for parents to ask questions. And then a deeper level to that is, as I said, we offer therapeutic intervention and we work in partnership with an organisation, a very close friend of mine, Daniel Belgrave. And he's a person that I use quite a lot within a lot of our interventions. And we've also got Dr. Lizzie, and she's an amazing human being around psychology. And so a lot of our staff are very well versed. We're not just individuals that have a passion and do this work. We're also passionate, but we've got the intellect and the expertise to be able to engage. And that's how we move as an organisation. We call it the Solve Way.
Yeah, it all makes so much sense when you say it like that. And there's a lot that you've set up there as well. That 360 approach, sounds like you've got so much going on. What was the first thing you started with, and how did you, set up the first Solve branch, if I can call it that? Or
that started on the back of, one of my old mentors, Raymond Douglas, big up Ray, and we were kind of just talking about, my unique selling point. What do I do really well?
Yeah.
And it was solving problems.
Yeah.
And that's how the birth of Solve came about. But he challenged my thinking, and he said, you need to, think big. Not just think of just a traditional community organization. You need to think national, international. So we said the center for something, and that's how we kind of started to do it. And the Center for Youth Violence and Conflict became the name. But what that meant was my first, I guess, opportunity came through the Peace and Crime Commission. You may remember some years back. When we were experiencing high levels of violence within the West Midlands and other parts of the country, there was a report that was created based on research in the West Midlands to kind of answer those questions about why do we think that West Midlands are experiencing a number of those levels, and a number of recommendations, 27, I believe, recommendations came out of that report. And those 27 recommendations essentially linked to opportunities for organisations to engage, whether it's sport, community, education, faith, whether that was to do with working directly with young people, families, and mental health. There's a whole series of recommendations. But one of those recommendations about a limitation in training, and there seemed to be a deficit in terms of the levels of professionalism and work around this particular space. So for me, that was a no-brainer coming out of the university teaching at undergraduate and master's level. Why not take this brain of lecturing and expertise in the field of social science and bring that into this space? And that's what it became. So the training element, that was kind of, it was a no-brainer. When I go back to my original statement or your original statement, bridging that gap between academia and the streets, that's what that was about. And then obviously because of my national reach, people just started knocking at the door saying, oh, you're not at the university no more. We need you to come in and utilize your expertise. Because you've also got to bear in mind, I was also doing research at the time. So I had published a number of articles that spoke about social media and violence. I spoke about one of my approaches, bringing youth work theory as well as criminological and social science theory together. And I came up with that concept, unrolled youth work. So I already had a series of approaches and methods of how I was going to engage with children and young people. So when I talk about that 360 approach, it's embedded based on evidence-based practice.
And everything just makes sense when you're saying it. From when we hear about your journey from the very, very beginning to where you are now, it seems like everything happened for a reason and everything's added up to do what you do today. Interestingly, you spoke about the partnership with the Premier League, and I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that are thinking, how does the Premier League partner with what we're speaking about? And I've seen you've been recently with Tottenham, with Chelsea. Just tell us, how does that link with the Premier League footballers and young people?
I think I'll start from the premise of me not being a football fan. I don't like football. But I feel like that's my unique selling point when I'm working in sport. And so my assumption is that what makes the footballers and players different to the young people that are in the youth centre? To me, nothing other than they're high profile players, they get a lot of money and so on and so forth. But that's never my interest. So how the relationship essentially started was through education. The Premier League, if you don't know, have a series of agendas that they have to ensure that players, staff across all of the football clubs under the Premier League have to go through. So similar to like Ofsted, there's no difference. So the players, staff have to have education on safeguarding. They have to have education on mental health and awareness and well-being. They have to have education on how to keep themselves safe. They have to have education on gender-based violence. They have to have education on appropriateness or whatever it may be. And we're an organization that provides training. So how the relationship essentially started was on the back of the George Floyd situation that was happening during 2020, if you remember back. And in the UK, there was quite a lot of conversation about how do we look at race within different sectors of our society or sections of our society. And I got a call. They seen that I do a lot of stuff around understanding racism and anti-oppressive practice, and they were quite keen to understand what that looks like from the vantage of football. So I had a meeting with Chelsea Football Club, big up Eva, the head of safeguarding. And that's how the relationship started. They were interested in what Outsolve does, and we told them about our 3-level approach. And they said, okay, well, this would be brilliant, for you to do this, not just with, the staff, but can you do this with the players? And some of the younger players from the academy. And again, we was like, no brainer, because it's like working in a school. And the Premier League, seeing that Chelsea had posted something on their website about this organization called Solve, helping us around this, their inclusion agenda. And they said, would you be willing to do the same thing for all of the football clubs? And we was like, And that's what I'm saying from my perspective. From it's no different to a school, a college, or a university saying, can we come in? Obviously, when you then take a picture with the first team, loads of people are now like, whoa, you work with all of these football clubs.
And you're just like, yes, yeah.
It just is what it is. And I think that's what then works when I'm with the players. They know I'm not a fan. So I feel like that human connection. Let's go back to what Miss Dana, Miss Broomont, Mr. Barrett, the compassion, the time. All of those things become important. So then when I'm having conversations with the players outside of the sessions, and what we're talking about, life, fatherhood, responsibility, safeguarding, making sure that they're safe, making sure that the environments that they're in are safe, and challenging friends and whatnot if anything was to go left. Those are the conversations I would have with a young person if I was in a youth centre or whatever. So that's why I keep saying, if you just take away the football for a moment, they're no different. And the problem is we live in a society where we put athletes, we put celebrities on this pedestal, and we say things like they're making all of this money so they can't do no wrong. And the reality is that they're human beings just like you and I. And it's about how do we engage with that. So our approach is very much a human, person-centered one. And I think that's what becomes our unique selling point when we're working with these individuals. But as I said, taking that very much evidence-based approach when we're engaging.
And although, they're just regular people just like me and you, surely when you work with young people as well, though, and they see, oh, you've worked with Chelsea, you've worked with Tottenham, that captures their attention
100%.
And it grips them straight away as well. So that must work,
100%.
benefit
and
you as well.
I think that then becomes, again, when we're talking about credibility and reputation, we may work with a child or a young person, and I say, like, I just came back from Villa this morning. Like, you what? It's like, like, did you see? Like, they were. And then, like, they'll show like a series of pictures, and I'm saying, oh yeah, you were sitting at the front, he was sitting over there, and I can't remember that one. And so already you've got a different connection and an interaction. And I guess because we've also part of a number of other projects and programs, we've been part of the Thrive NatWest project, which is the partnership between Marcus Rashford and NatWest. So obviously young people have got to meet Marcus Rashford, they've done video calls and stuff like that with him as well. So again, from the perspective of a child or young person, I'm going to go back to that concept of representation matters. So when they're engaging with people that they like and people that they look up to, role modeling becomes so important. So when we're doing a lot of work with the players, whether that's from the first team or across the academy, getting them to understand that role modeling becomes so key, and you're always under the microscope, unfortunately. And it is about, how do you move? How do you behave? What are some of the things that we've seen across football negatively? And what are you doing to challenge, speak out, and also ensure that people are safe? And how do we also advocate for others that may be dealing with issues, whether it's to do with race, whether it's to do with gender, whether it's to do with sexuality, whether it's to do with violence, whatever it may be? How do you become advocates? How do you become allies to the conversation? And that's essentially what we do in the football club. So it's nothing to do with football. So when people say to me, oh, can I get a signed shirt? No. Can I come with you in one of the sessions? No, because we're not there for football, we're there for education. But I understand it. People see the pictures of their stars and they think it's that what it is. And I don't think I talk about football other than me telling them that, I don't like it. It's funny because I went for food with one of my friends recently, Tyrone, and football's on. It was the first Tottenham match that I can say for 45 minutes I paid real attention to. I mean, I've been to football matches before with my friends and I've dozed off. That's how boring I find football. So when I watched this game, it was funny because I was sitting there saying, I know him, like I seen him last week. And it was funny because maybe for the first time I got to experience what it's like when you look for somebody like a fan that's really whatever. So I said that to them when I was with them this Monday, and then they couldn't stop laughing. And I was saying, "You're liking football now, aren't you?" I said, "It's weird now. Me working in football now,
see it a little
bit
differently.
I'm seeing it a little bit different."
Almost colleagues, maybe. I guess not colleagues, students. Students. Exactly amazing. Look, I love how passionate you are about just the work you do and the way you speak, and you can just tell how much it means to you. What I want to know is, what is the bit that you really love? What is the best bit about the work that you do? What means the most to you?
Two things. I think one is being able to transform lives and connect to the hearts of people. I think the second thing for me is being able to enable people to provide for themselves and give people opportunities. We've employed over, 70 members of staff. So when I look at that on reflection, I'm just a little crane that's come out of Hockley, Birmingham, like I'm an employer, so I know it seems quite strange and bizarre, but I guess when people look at what I do and they say, like, right, what have you done? I've been able to provide for potentially 70 families and more.
Yeah. Amazing.
So those are the two things for me that stand out when you ask me that question.
And the ongoing mission for you, for Solve, what is the mission?
Continue to bridge that gap and set the standard.
Yeah. And do you think there's an end goal, or?
I think the end goal is organic. I think that if I'm setting the standard, and I think if I continue to bridge that gap, it will leave a legacy of individuals that are going to be like, that's one of the blueprints and that's one of the models that I would like to follow in order to create something in my environment, my community.
And that's how you pass it on.
And that's how you pass it on.
Yeah, amazing.
The door's always open.
Yeah, love it. Well, look, I'm going to go into some quick fire questions if you don't mind at the end. So, number 1, tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Straight away, didn't even let me finish. Number 2, I think I know this one. Villa or city?
Villa.
3, books or podcasts?
Podcast.
4, one book or podcast recommendation?
Podcast recommendation.
Go on, what is it?
Diary of a CEO.
Nice. 5, one app that you just could not live without?
Instagram.
Nice. Number 6, your morning routine?
Go straight to Instagram.
That's it. As soon as you wake
what's
up.
going on in the world.
Yeah.
And that's normally how I connect to what's going on.
Nice.
I like to be in tune and I like to know what's going on. So all the things that are trending. If I'm going to a session, I already know what's the hot topic.
Yeah. Nice. Number 7, proudest achievement?
Bringing my nan to see an award.
Nice. Love it. Number 8, morning person or night owl?
Night owl.
Night owl.
Yeah. My body clock wakes up about 11, half 11.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I take my hat off to people that go to the gym and all that stuff in the morning.
Yeah.
Never gonna catch me.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
What time are you going to bed?
Between 11 and 1.
Yeah. Favorite quote?
Education is the passport to the future. The future belongs to those that prepare for it today. Malcolm X.
And finally, number 10, one piece of advice that you would give to a young person that's currently going through a tough time.
Speak out.
Speak out. Love it. Well, look, that wraps it up for today. Really, really appreciate your time. And what I'll do is I'll put the links to your website and everything if people want to get in touch and know a lot more, and your Instagram as well. So, thanks very much.
Cool. Thank you, bro.